Dr. Zethkari adjusted his viewing screen and sighed with satisfaction. The blue planet called Earth hung before him like a jewel against the black void of space. His research vessel, the Luminar's Pride, maintained its position just outside the solar system's detection range. Today marked the beginning of what he expected to be a simple assignment. The Galactic Research Consortium had given him a straightforward task: study humanity's military history and prepare a report for the Council. Every species that joined the galactic community underwent this evaluation. It was routine work, really. Most civilizations followed predictable patterns. They fought primitive wars, learned from their mistakes, and eventually evolved into peaceful societies ready for contact with other worlds. Humans would be no different. Dr. Zethkari, his assistant Velnara, called from across the research bay. "I have finished setting up the temporal scanning arrays. We can observe any period in human history now." Zethkari nodded, his four arms working efficiently across multiple control panels. As one of the galaxy's leading experts on species development, he had studied dozens of civilizations. The pattern was always the same. Young species fought over basic resources like water and territory. As they grew smarter, they learned that cooperation worked better than conflict. Eventually, they reached the stars as unified, peaceful peoples. He had written the standard textbook on this subject. Chapter after chapter described how intelligence naturally led to peace. War was simply a phase that primitive minds went through before reaching true civilization. "Begin with their earliest recorded conflicts," he instructed Velnara. "We will work our way forward through their timeline." The viewing screen flickered and changed. Now it showed ancient humans fighting with crude weapons made of stone and metal. Zethkari watched warriors charge at each other with spears and swords. Blood flowed freely across primitive battlefields. "Typical," he muttered, making notes on his datapad. "Resource competition and territorial disputes. Very predictable." He observed ancient battles between tribes and early kingdoms. Humans fought over fertile land, sources of water, and control of trade routes. It was exactly what he expected to see. These early conflicts made perfect sense from a survival perspective. Hours passed as Zethkari studied humanity's ancient wars. The Romans conquered vast territories to secure resources. The Mongols swept across continents to control trade. Medieval kingdoms battled for strategic advantages. Every conflict had logical, material reasons behind it. "This should be a quick report," Zethkari told Velnara. "Humans are following the standard development pattern. We will probably finish early." But as they moved forward in time, something began to feel different. The weapons grew more sophisticated, but that was normal. The tactics became more complex, which was also expected. What started to bother Zethkari was the intensity he observed in human faces. During a battle in what humans called the Crusades, he watched a human soldier named Peter continue fighting even after receiving multiple wounds. The man could have retreated safely, but instead he pressed forward against impossible odds. When asked by his commander why he risked his life for land he would never own, Peter replied that he fought for God and honor. Zethkari paused the recording. "Velnara, what did that human mean by fighting for honor?" His assistant checked her translation matrix. "It appears to be an abstract concept related to personal dignity and social standing, not directly connected to survival or resource acquisition." Abstract concepts? Zethkari found this puzzling. In his studies of other species, warriors fought for practical reasons. Food, shelter, safety, territory. Fighting for ideas seemed wasteful and illogical. He continued observing. In what humans called the American Civil War, he watched soldiers from both sides charge across open fields into devastating gunfire. A young man named Billy kept running forward even as his friends fell around him. When captured and questioned, Billy said he fought to preserve the Union, whatever that meant. On the other side, a Confederate soldier named Joe died defending a position that had no strategic value. His final words were about defending his homeland and way of life. Again, these seemed like abstract ideas rather than concrete benefits. "This is unusual," Zethkari admitted to Velnara. "Most species fight for practical advantages. These humans appear willing to die for concepts that provide no material benefit." The pattern continued as they studied more recent conflicts. In World War I, they observed humans fighting in conditions that no rational being would tolerate. Soldiers lived in muddy trenches filled with disease and death. They fought for months over tiny pieces of land that had no real value. A human named Charlie wrote letters home describing the horror of battle. Yet when offered a chance to leave due to injury, he chose to return to the fighting. He wrote that he could not abandon his friends, even though staying meant almost certain death. "Doctor," Velnara said quietly, "I am beginning to feel disturbed by these observations. Why do humans make such illogical choices?" Zethkari was wondering the same thing. Every other species he had studied reached a point where they recognized the futility of such conflicts. They developed diplomacy, trade agreements, and peaceful methods of resolving disputes. Intelligent beings learned that cooperation produced better results than warfare. But humans seemed to embrace conflict, even when it offered no logical benefits. They fought for ideas, beliefs, and loyalties that existed only in their minds. They sacrificed their lives for abstract concepts like honor, duty, and freedom. As the day ended, Zethkari reviewed his notes. The early stages of human development had seemed normal enough, but as their civilization advanced, their warfare became more intense rather than less so. This contradicted everything he knew about species evolution. "Tomorrow we will examine their more recent conflicts," he told Velnara. "Perhaps their modern era will show the expected progression toward peace." But privately, Zethkari was starting to worry. These humans were not following the normal pattern. Instead of growing more peaceful as they became more intelligent, they seemed to be growing more dangerous. Their willingness to fight and die for abstract ideas was unlike anything he had seen before. He looked out at the small blue planet below and felt the first stirrings of unease. What kind of species had the consortium decided to evaluate, and what would happen when these strange, illogical, surprisingly intense creatures learned they were not alone in the galaxy? The questions kept him awake long into the ship's artificial night cycle. The next morning brought no relief for Dr. Zethkari's growing concerns. He had spent the night reviewing data from other species' military histories, hoping to find some precedent for human behavior. He found none. "Today we examine what humans call their world wars," he announced to Velnara, who looked tired and worried. She had clearly not slept well either. The screen flickered to life, showing the European continent in the early 20th century. Zethkari focused his scans on the massive conflict humans called World War II. Within minutes, he knew this would be unlike anything he had studied before. The scale shocked him first. Millions of humans from dozens of countries fought across multiple continents simultaneously, but scale alone did not make this unique. What disturbed him was the ferocity and determination he observed in individual humans. At a place called Stalingrad, he watched Lieutenant Jake Morrison lead a small group of Soviet soldiers in defending a ruined building. They had no strategic value, no hope of reinforcement, and no chance of survival. Logic demanded they retreat or surrender. Instead, Jake and his men fought for every room, every staircase, every pile of rubble. "Why do they not withdraw?" Velnara asked, her voice shaking slightly. Zethkari studied Jake's face through the scanner. The young human's eyes burned with determination, even as explosions shook the building around him. When German soldiers offered surrender terms, Jake responded with gunfire. He would rather die than give up 1 meter of ground. "I do not understand their reasoning," Zethkari admitted. The pattern repeated everywhere they looked. On Pacific Islands, they observed Captain Lisa Turner coordinating impossible evacuation missions under heavy Japanese fire. She could have saved herself easily, but instead she remained on the beach directing rescue boats until every wounded soldier was loaded. When enemy aircraft strafed her position, Lisa threw herself over injured men to shield them with her own body. She took multiple wounds but kept working. Her final transmission before losing consciousness was asking if all her men were safe. "This level of self-sacrifice defies evolutionary logic," Zethkari muttered, taking frantic notes. "Protecting one's offspring makes sense. Protecting genetic relatives has biological advantages. But these humans risk everything for strangers." The situation grew worse as they studied medical personnel. Dr. Paul Carter, a human medic, continued treating wounded soldiers while artillery shells exploded around his aid station. When the building collapsed, he dug through rubble with his bare hands to reach trapped patients. Paul worked for 18 straight hours without rest, treating enemy soldiers alongside his own people. When offered a chance to evacuate, he refused. His recorded words haunted Zethkari. "These men need me. I cannot abandon them." Eventually, Paul died from exhaustion and injuries sustained while saving others. He could have lived safely behind the lines but chose certain death to help strangers. "Doctor," Velnara whispered, "I am experiencing psychological distress from these observations. May I request a break?" Zethkari wanted to grant her request, but he needed her help. The data was becoming too complex for one researcher to handle. "Soon," he promised. "But first we must understand what drives this behavior." They focused on a battle in France where Sergeant Dan Phillips led an attack across an open field. Machine gun fire cut down dozens of soldiers, but Dan kept advancing. When asked by a war correspondent why he continued such a hopeless assault, Dan replied, "Those are my boys up there. I won't leave them." Dan died 50 meters from the enemy position, still crawling forward despite multiple gunshot wounds. His final act was throwing a grenade that eliminated the machine gun nest, allowing his surviving men to advance. The more Zethkari studied, the more disturbed he became. Human soldiers consistently chose death over surrender, even when surrender offered no dishonor. They fought for concepts like duty, loyalty, and patriotism that provided no material benefits. At a place called Normandy, he watched thousands of humans charge across a beach into devastating gunfire. They could see their friends dying around them. They knew the odds of survival were minimal, yet they kept moving forward. Private Bobby Williams stepped off a landing craft into chest-deep water under heavy fire. He watched the man next to him get shot and fall. Instead of seeking cover, Bobby grabbed the wounded soldier and dragged him toward shore while bullets splashed around them. "Why does he risk his life for someone who is probably already dead?" Velnara asked. Zethkari had no answer. By any logical calculation, Bobby should have focused on his own survival. Instead, he chose to help others at great personal cost. This pattern appeared throughout human warfare. The air war proved equally disturbing. Captain Steve Lewis flew bombing missions over Germany, knowing that enemy fighters shot down 20% of his squadron on each flight. Simple mathematics said he would be dead within 5 missions, yet Steve continued flying. When asked why he volunteered for additional missions after completing his required tour, Steve said, "My crew depends on me. The guys on the ground are counting on us." He flew until enemy fighters finally shot him down over Berlin. Female pilots like Lieutenant Mary Johnson showed the same incomprehensible courage. She flew transport missions into combat zones, delivering supplies to trapped units. Her aircraft had no weapons, no armor, and no escort. She was essentially flying a slow, defenseless target through active battlefields. Mary died on her 20th mission when enemy fighters intercepted her transport. Her last radio transmission was asking if her cargo of medical supplies had been delivered successfully. She cared more about wounded soldiers she had never met than her own survival. "This makes no sense," Zethkari said, reviewing his notes. "Humans seem to actively seek dangerous situations. They volunteer for missions with minimal survival probability. They prioritize strangers' welfare over their own lives." Velnara was now visibly distressed. "Doctor, I keep having strange mental episodes. Images of humans dying for no logical reason. I see that soldier Dan crawling across the field even in my rest periods." Zethkari felt similar disturbance. Human warfare was affecting his psychological state in ways he had never experienced. Other species fought when necessary, but they approached it rationally. They weighed costs and benefits. They surrendered when defeat became inevitable. Humans did the opposite. They fought hardest when defeat seemed certain. They made their greatest sacrifices when logic demanded self-preservation. They turned warfare into something beyond mere conflict over resources. As the day ended, Zethkari stared at his accumulating data with growing dread. Humans were not following any known pattern of species development. Their wars were not rational contests for material advantages. They were something else entirely, something that challenged his understanding of intelligent behavior. "Tomorrow we examine their more recent conflicts," he told Velnara. Perhaps modern humans have learned to be more logical, but he no longer believed this was true. If anything, the evidence suggested humans were becoming more dangerous, not less so, and they were rapidly developing technology that could take this disturbing capacity for warfare beyond their small planet. The implications terrified him. Dr. Zethkari began the 3rd day of research with hands that shook slightly as he activated the scanning arrays. Velnara had requested medical leave after experiencing what humans would call nightmares, but duty required her presence. She sat at her station looking pale and exhausted. "Today we examine the period humans call the Cold War," Zethkari announced. hoping that perhaps this era would show more rational behavior. He was wrong. Within hours, Zethkari discovered something that challenged his understanding of intelligence itself. Humans had developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet, then built enough of them to kill everything multiple times over. They called this strategy mutually assured destruction. This cannot be correct, he told Velnara. No intelligent species would create weapons designed to eliminate their own civilization. But the data was undeniable. General Rick Barnes, sitting in an underground bunker in Montana, controlled missiles that could destroy entire cities within 30 minutes. Across the planet, Colonel Amy Washington maintained similar weapons in hidden silos. Both sides had enough nuclear bombs to end all life on Earth. The truly disturbing part was that humans considered this arrangement peaceful. Zethkari studied recorded conversations between military leaders. They spoke calmly about scenarios that would kill hundreds of millions of people. They planned strategies that assumed the destruction of their own countries. They calculated acceptable losses in numbers that exceeded the total population of most planets. "Doctor," Velnara said weakly, "are we certain these humans are sane?" "I am beginning to question that myself," Zethkari admitted. The nuclear standoff lasted decades. Both sides maintained constant readiness to destroy civilization at a moment's notice. They built bombs hidden in mountains, submarines that could end the world from underwater, and aircraft that carried death across continents. But that was not the worst discovery. As Zethkari studied more recent conflicts, he found something that broke his understanding of rational warfare entirely. In places like Vietnam and Afghanistan, humans fought wars that no logical species would continue. Staff Sergeant Tony Brooks landed in Vietnam knowing the conflict was unpopular at home and unlikely to achieve its stated objectives. Military leaders admitted privately that victory was improbable. Yet Tony and millions like him continued fighting for years in conditions that would have driven other species to immediate surrender. The jungle warfare was particularly disturbing. Humans fought in terrain where they could not see their enemies, against opponents who knew the land perfectly, for objectives that changed constantly. Disease, booby traps, and ambushes killed thousands of soldiers. Tony spent 2 tours in Vietnam, watching friends die for hills that were abandoned days later. When asked why he returned for a second deployment, Tony said, "My brothers are still over there. They need me." "Brothers?" Velnara checked her translation matrix. "His biological siblings are not present in this conflict." "No," Zethkari said grimly. "He refers to other soldiers as family. Humans form emotional bonds with their military units that override survival instincts. In Afghanistan, Private Kate Sullivan participated in what humans called asymmetric warfare. She knew the enemy could strike anywhere at any time, using weapons hidden among civilians. Every patrol could end in death. Every knock on a door might trigger an explosion. Kate served multiple deployments in a conflict that offered no clear objectives or definition of victory. When a roadside bomb killed half her squad, she volunteered to extend her tour rather than return home. Her explanation defied logic. "Someone has to finish what we started." The pattern repeated in Iraq, Somalia, and dozens of smaller conflicts. Humans consistently fought in situations where other species would have negotiated withdrawal agreements. They seemed to view impossible odds as motivation rather than discouragement. But the discovery that truly terrified Zethkari came when he studied special operations. Forces Commander Neil Foster coordinated missions that involved volunteers for near-certain death assignments. When conventional forces could not accomplish critical objectives, humans would send small teams on what they called suicide missions. The volunteers came forward willingly. Zethkari watched recordings of briefings, where human commanders explained that a mission had a 5% survival probability. Instead of refusing, soldiers competed for the opportunity to participate. They argued about who was most qualified to die for their cause. "This is beyond irrational," Zethkari muttered. "This is actively seeking death." Sergeant Ben Murphy volunteered for a mission to destroy an enemy communications center deep behind hostile lines. He knew the assignment meant certain death or capture. When asked why he volunteered, Ben simply said, "Someone has to do it." Ben died completing his mission, but not before ensuring the objective was accomplished. His final radio transmission was confirming mission success, not requesting rescue. Lieutenant Sandra Adams led a team to rescue prisoners held in an enemy stronghold. The mission required infiltrating a heavily defended compound, with no escape route planned. Sandra and her team went anyway. They died fighting their way out with the rescued prisoners. Sandra's last act was providing covering fire so the prisoners could escape while she held off pursuing enemies alone. "Doctor," Velnara said, her voice barely audible, "I cannot continue observing this data. These humans deliberately choose death over logical alternatives. They seem to prefer impossible situations." Zethkari felt the same psychological strain, but the research had to continue. "We must understand what we are dealing with," he said. "The Council needs to know." As he studied more special operations missions, a horrifying pattern emerged. Humans had systematized their willingness to die. They created entire military units dedicated to impossible missions. They trained volunteers to accept death as a likely outcome of their duties. Navy SEAL teams, Army Rangers, Marine Force Reconnaissance, and dozens of other elite units existed solely to accomplish objectives that conventional forces could not achieve. Their training deliberately pushed volunteers beyond normal human limits, creating soldiers who viewed death as an acceptable tool. Captain John Martinez led a team into a terrorist compound, knowing they would face 10-to-1 odds. When offered air support that might have improved their chances, John refused because civilian casualties were possible. He chose to fight at a disadvantage rather than risk innocent lives. John and his team eliminated their targets but died in the process. Their sacrifice prevented a terrorist attack that would have killed thousands of civilians they had never met. The technology integration made everything worse. Modern humans used computers and satellites to coordinate their impossible missions. They employed artificial intelligence to calculate optimal sacrifice ratios. They had turned their willingness to die into a precise science. Drone operators like Captain Lisa Brown sat in comfortable offices thousands of miles from combat zones, but still demonstrated the same disturbing psychology. When her drone aircraft was damaged by enemy fire, Lisa chose to stay connected and guide it to the target manually, rather than abandon the mission safely. The damaged drone crashed, but not before completing its mission to protect a convoy of human civilians. Lisa had risked her expensive equipment and her own career to save strangers in a distant country. As the day ended, Zethkari reviewed data that fundamentally challenged everything he knew about intelligent species. Humans had not only failed to evolve beyond warfare, they had perfected it into an art form. They had created military forces specifically designed to accept impossible missions and succeed through sheer willingness to die. "Tomorrow we examine their current military capabilities," he told Velnara, who was shaking visibly. "Doctor," she whispered, "what if first contact goes badly? What if these humans decide we are enemies?" Zethkari had been trying not to think about that possibility. But the evidence was clear. Humans possessed the technology to be dangerous and the psychology to use it without regard for their own survival. The galaxy had never encountered anything like them. Dr. Zethkari had barely slept for the third night in a row. His research was entering territory that no galactic protocol had prepared him for. Today would examine humanity's most recent military developments, and he already suspected what he would find would be worse than everything that came before. Velnara had officially requested transfer to another research project, but the Council had denied her request. They needed her expertise to complete the evaluation. She sat at her station looking hollow and frightened. "Today we study what humans call modern warfare," Zethkari announced, activating the scanning arrays with hands that no longer trembled, because they had not stopped shaking for days. The first discovery made him question his own sanity. Humans had developed something they called total war, not just defeating enemy armies or capturing territory, but completely destroying their opponent's ability to fight, think, or exist as an organized society. He watched Admiral Betty Ross coordinate bombing campaigns designed to eliminate not just military targets but also factories, power plants, transportation networks, and civilian infrastructure. The goal was not victory in any traditional sense, but the complete annihilation of enemy civilization. "This exceeds all known parameters for rational conflict," Zethkari muttered, studying the data. "They are not seeking to win. They are seeking to erase their opponents from existence." General Alex Thompson planned operations that targeted enemy leadership, communications, supply lines, and civilian morale simultaneously. His stated objective was to make continued resistance impossible by destroying every aspect of enemy society. But the truly horrifying revelation came when Zethakari studied the development of nuclear weapons. Captain Steve Lewis had returned from his bombing missions in World War II, but his role in that conflict was nothing compared to what came next. Zethakari watched him coordinate flights that carried single bombs capable of destroying entire cities. The human who shocked him most was Dr. Helen Clark, a brilliant scientist who worked on the Manhattan Project. She knew she was creating weapons that could kill hundreds of thousands of people instantly. She understood the long-term radiation effects would cause suffering for generations. She built them anyway. Why? Velnara asked weakly, watching Dr. Clark calibrate mechanisms designed to trigger nuclear fusion. Why would an intelligent being create such devices? Zethakari had no answer. Dr. Clark's recorded interviews showed a thoughtful, caring person who loved her family and wanted to build a better world. Yet she spent years developing weapons that could end civilization. When asked about the moral implications, Dr. Clark replied, "If we do not build them, our enemies will. We must have the capability to defend ourselves." The logic was circular and terrifying. Humans built world-ending weapons to protect themselves from world-ending weapons that did not yet exist. They created the very threats they claimed to defend against, but discovering nuclear weapons was not the worst revelation of the day. Zethakari's scanners detected classified human military projects that suggested something unthinkable. Humans were preparing for war against extraterrestrial species. Colonel Ryan Parker oversaw development of theoretical weapons systems designed specifically for space-based combat. He had never seen an alien spacecraft, had no proof that other species existed, yet he dedicated his career to developing ways to fight them. "They are planning to make war against us," Velnara whispered in horror. The evidence was overwhelming. Major Sandra Kim worked on defensive systems designed to counter faster-than-light travel, energy weapons, and gravitational manipulation technology. She was preparing to fight enemies whose capabilities she could only imagine. Most disturbing of all, the humans assumed they could win. Project files showed detailed analyses of potential alien advantages: superior technology, advanced materials, exotic energy sources, and greater numbers. Human military planners acknowledged all these disadvantages, then developed strategies to overcome them anyway. The strategies relied on humanity's most terrifying characteristic: their willingness to die. General Mike Butler's classified reports outlined scenarios where Earth faced invasion by technologically superior aliens. His recommended response involved nuclear weapons, biological warfare, guerrilla tactics, and something he called acceptable casualty ratios that included the deaths of billions of humans. They would sacrifice their entire species rather than surrender, Zethakari said, his voice hollow with shock. The plans assumed that alien invaders would eventually leave or be defeated if humans made the cost of occupation too high. Even if 90% of humanity died in the process, the survivors would continue fighting until the aliens gave up. But the humans were not content with defensive preparations. Air Force Colonel Lisa Price directed research into offensive capabilities for interplanetary warfare. She worked on projects to weaponize asteroids, create space-based nuclear platforms, and develop kinetic bombardment systems that could strike targets anywhere in a solar system. "Doctor," Velnara said, barely audible, "they are not just preparing to defend themselves. They are preparing to attack other worlds." The technical specifications were sophisticated and practical. Humans had designed delivery systems for nuclear weapons that could reach any planet in their local stellar neighborhood. They had calculated orbital mechanics for asteroid bombardment scenarios. They had developed theoretical faster-than-light missiles. None of these weapons existed yet, but the plans were detailed and achievable with their advancing technology. Captain David Adams commanded theoretical space military units that existed only on paper. His training manuals outlined tactics for fighting in zero gravity, techniques for boarding enemy spacecraft, and methods for conducting planetary assaults against defended worlds. The manuals assumed human forces would be outnumbered and outgunned in any space conflict. They also assumed humans would win anyway through superior tactics, better training, and greater willingness to accept casualties. Sergeant Tony Williams trained for combat scenarios that included fighting aliens in underground tunnels, urban environments, and hostile atmospheric conditions. He practiced techniques for fighting enemies he had never seen, using equipment specifically designed to counter imagined alien advantages. The most terrifying document Zethkari discovered was titled Interstellar Conflict Resolution Protocols. The author, General Patricia Johnson, outlined humanity's official policy for contact with potentially hostile alien species. The policy had 3 phases: deterrence, containment, and extinction. Deterrence involved demonstrating human military capabilities to discourage alien aggression. Containment meant limiting alien activities through force if necessary. Extinction was exactly what it sounded like: the complete elimination of alien threats through any means available. The protocols explicitly stated that humans would prefer mutual annihilation to submission or conquest by alien forces. They would rather die fighting than live peacefully under alien rule. Zethkari realized with growing horror. They viewed death as preferable to defeat. Worse still, the protocols included provisions for preemptive strikes against alien civilizations deemed potentially threatening. Humans were prepared to attack other species based on theoretical future threats that might never materialize. As Zethkari compiled his data for the day, he realized that humanity represented something unprecedented in galactic history: a species that had weaponized their own extinction instincts. They had turned their willingness to die into a strategic advantage. Every other species the galaxy had encountered followed logical patterns. They fought when necessary, negotiated when possible, and submitted when defeated. They valued survival above abstract principles. Humans did the opposite. They fought when fighting was impossible, refused to negotiate from positions of weakness, and preferred death to submission. They valued their abstract principles more than their own lives. Tomorrow we examine their space program, Zethkari told Velnara. We need to understand how close they are to actually implementing these plans. Velnara was crying, though her species had no tears. Doctor, what are we going to tell the Council? These humans are not ready for peaceful contact. They are ready for war. Zethkari stared at the blue planet below, knowing that somewhere on its surface humans were right now planning ways to fight enemies they had never met. They were preparing for wars that might never happen, against species that might not even be hostile. And they were very good at it. The implications for first contact were becoming clear, and they were terrifying. Humanity was not just another species to be evaluated for galactic membership. They were a potential threat to every civilization in the galaxy. The worst part was that they did not even know it yet. Dr. Zethkari sat before his final report, 4 days of research having fundamentally changed his understanding of intelligence, civilization, and the nature of species development. Velnara had finally collapsed from psychological exhaustion and was in the medical bay under sedation. He would complete this evaluation alone. The last day of research had focused on humanity's space program, and the discoveries had shattered every assumption about peaceful species development that the galaxy held sacred. Commander Frank Stone led the International Space Station, but Zethkari's deeper scans revealed that every system aboard could be easily converted for military use. The station's solar panels could power weapon systems. Its manufacturing capabilities could produce military equipment. Its position provided perfect surveillance and targeting, opportunities for planetary bombardment. Humans had built their space program with warfare applications, disguised as peaceful exploration. Mission. Specialist Julie Adams conducted experiments in microgravity that officially studied materials, science, and biological adaptation. But Zethkari recognized the real purpose: developing technology for combat in space environments. Her research would allow humans to fight effectively in zero-gravity conditions. The most disturbing revelation came from studying human space exploration philosophy. Dr. Lucy Grant, a civilian historian who had never served in any military, gave recorded lectures about humanity's expansion into space. Her words revealed the terrifying truth about human nature. Every frontier humanity has ever encountered, we have conquered through superior determination. Dr. Grant explained to her university students, we do not explore to satisfy curiosity. We explore to expand our territory and capabilities. Space is simply the next frontier to be dominated. She continued with observations that made Zethkari's blood freeze. Humans excel at warfare because we have turned conflict into a science. We study every battle, learn from every defeat, and incorporate those lessons into our culture. Each generation of humans is more effective at warfare than the last. Dr. Grant's analysis of human expansion patterns showed a species that had never encountered a frontier they could not conquer. Humans had spread across their planet by defeating or displacing every other intelligent species they encountered. They had conquered environments from frozen polar regions to burning deserts through sheer determination and adaptability. We are apex predators pretending to be herbivores, Dr. Grant told her class with disturbing pride. Human civilization is built on our ability to organize violence more effectively than our competitors. The historian's most chilling observation was about human cooperation. Humans only achieve true unity when faced with external threats. Our greatest technological advances, our most impressive organizational achievements, and our strongest social bonds all emerge during wartime. Conflict does not destroy human civilization. It strengthens it. Zethkari realized with horror that Dr. Grant was correct. Human societies became more advanced, more cooperative, and more effective when facing external enemies. War made them stronger, not weaker. Astronaut Commander Betty Robinson commanded upcoming missions to Mars, but her real expertise was in military logistics and resource acquisition. Her mission plans included detailed surveys of mineral resources, defensive positions, and strategic advantages that Mars would provide for future Earth expansion. "We are not going to Mars to explore," she explained in classified briefings that Zethkari intercepted. "We are going to establish humanity's first extraterrestrial military base. Mars will be our platform for expanding throughout the solar system." The technical capabilities that humans were developing made everything worse. Captain Jim Scott worked on propulsion systems that could theoretically reach other star systems within decades. His designs included provisions for carrying large populations and extensive military equipment. Humans were not just planning to explore space. They were planning to colonize it, control it, and defend it against any other species they might encounter. Dr. Anna Martinez directed research into terraforming technology that could make hostile planets suitable for human habitation. But Zethkari recognized the dual applications. The same technology could make enemy planets uninhabitable. Humans could destroy alien worlds as easily as they could improve their own. As Zethkari compiled his final analysis, he struggled to comprehend the implications of his discoveries. Humanity represented something that challenged the galaxy's fundamental assumptions about intelligence and civilization. Every other species followed predictable development patterns. They fought primitive wars, learned cooperation was more effective than conflict, developed peaceful technologies, and eventually reached space as unified, rational civilizations ready for diplomatic contact with other worlds. Humans had followed a completely different path. They had perfected warfare while simultaneously developing peaceful technologies. They had learned to cooperate internally while maintaining their capacity for external violence. They had reached space not as peaceful explorers but as potential conquerors. The evidence suggested that humans viewed the galaxy as territory to be claimed, rather than a community to be joined. They assumed that contact with alien species would involve conflict, and they were preparing to win those conflicts. Most terrifying of all, they probably could win. Zethkari had studied humanity's capacity for innovation under pressure, their willingness to sacrifice everything for abstract principles, and their ability to turn every setback into a learning experience that made them more dangerous. No other species in galactic history had demonstrated such characteristics. If humans decided that other species represented threats, they would find ways to eliminate those threats regardless of technological or numerical disadvantages. If humans decided that galactic civilization needed to be reorganized according to their principles, they would reorganize it. The galaxy contained hundreds of peaceful species that had evolved beyond warfare. None of them were prepared to face opponents who viewed death as an acceptable tactical option and treated impossible odds as motivational challenges. In his final report, Zethkari wrote the most difficult recommendations of his career. Humanity represents an unprecedented threat to galactic stability. They have not evolved beyond warfare, but have instead perfected it into a science. They approach every situation with the assumption that conflict is inevitable and victory is achievable through superior determination and acceptable losses. First contact with humanity should be approached with extreme caution. Traditional diplomatic protocols assume that intelligent species prefer cooperation to conflict. Humans prefer whatever approach achieves their objectives most effectively, including conflicts that result in mutual annihilation. The Galactic Council faces an impossible choice. We cannot integrate humanity into galactic civilization using standard protocols because they are not a standard species. We cannot ignore them because their technology is advancing rapidly and their expansion into space appears inevitable. We cannot eliminate them preemptively because doing so would violate every principle of galactic law and because the attempt would likely fail. Humans excel at fighting superior opponents and would view such an attack as proof that their assumptions about alien hostility were correct. My recommendation is to avoid any contact with humanity until the Council develops new protocols for dealing with a species that has weaponized extinction-level determination and treats interstellar warfare as an inevitable aspect of cosmic expansion. Humanity's greatest strength is not their technology or their numbers. It is their absolute refusal to accept defeat as long as any human remains alive to continue fighting. They have turned the survival instinct that drives other species to surrender into a motivation for increasingly desperate resistance. The galaxy has never encountered apex predators, disguised as a peaceful civilization. We are not prepared for what humans represent, and we may never be. Seth Kari sealed his report and transmitted it to the Galactic Council with the highest priority classification. Then he ordered his ship to retreat to a safe distance from the solar system. He looked back at the small blue planet that housed the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever encountered. Somewhere on that world, humans were continuing their preparations for wars that might never happen, against enemies they had never met. And when first contact finally occurred, they would be ready. The galaxy would not be.